After being humiliated by the bullies at his school, a lonely young man decides to fight back and waits for the right moment to taste revenge against his seniors. Today we're going to recap the story of the movie, Evil, from 2003. Eric Ponte is a 16-year-old teenager who lives in a violent home where he suffers abuse from his stepfather. For him, any slip-up by the young man is grounds for aggression, and his mother has never had the strength to defend him. Living in a broken family, Eric began to reproduce the same aggressive behavior with his classmates at school and, as a result, was always involved in bloody fights. After brutally injuring a young man in his class, the young man was taken to the principal's office, who expelled him from the school for fear that he would harm other students. As he had already been expelled from several schools, Eric was not accepted at any other public institution, so his mother decided to sell some of the property she inherited from her late husband to pay for a boarding school for the young man. With the help of Ekengren, a childhood friend of Eric's father and the family's lawyer, the woman raised the money needed to send her son to one of the most prestigious schools in the country. When the lawyer leaves, Mrs. Ponte informs him that Eric will be leaving on the train that will leave in the next 4 hours and says that she has done this so that he can have a chance to start his life over away from his abusive stepfather. Before saying goodbye to her son, the woman begs him not to get into trouble this time and tells him that this is his last chance to graduate from high school. After a long train journey, Eric finally arrives at his new school and is surprised to discover that the place is completely different from any school he's ever been to. When he gets there, he is greeted by Otto Silverhjelm, the head of the student council. He reveals that one of his duties is to introduce the new students to the school and asks Eric to follow him. When he arrives at his quarters, the teenager discovers that his roommate is Pierre Tanguy and, after dropping off his suitcases, he continues his tour of the boarding school. When he discovers that Eric is a swimmer, Otto takes him to see the pool and the young man feels grateful to his mother for sending him there. When he returns to his room, he finally meets Pierre and soon discovers that they have some tastes in common. Despite being a troublemaker, Eric was always very intelligent and got good grades. However, in that school, the subjects are much more difficult and the teachers demand greater dedication from the students. So Pierre offers to give the young man some private lessons and says that if Eric doesn't get good grades, he'll give his money back. That evening, before dinner, all the students and teachers gather in the cafeteria and say a prayer before eating. Eric has never been a religious man, so he's not used to this practice, but he decides to keep his manners so as not to dirty his name on the very first day. Sitting right in front of him is Johan, one of his classmates, and, during a conversation with him, he discovers that the students at that school are segregated according to the social class of their families. After dinner, Pierre invites him to smoke behind the dining hall and advises his new friend to be discreet so as not to attract attention. That way, he'll be able to stay out of trouble. If he does something wrong, like swearing, his supervisors are allowed to punish him, and Eric wonders what will happen if he fights back. Then he learns that if he attacks any member of the student council, he will be expelled from school. The next morning, Eric goes to his first class and realizes that his teacher is extremely prejudiced, favoring the students with the characteristic German biotype. While talking about Mr. Melander, the young man ends up uttering a swear word and his supervisor decides to punish him by stabbing him in the head. However, the young man refuses to do this and would rather spend the weekend locked up in his room than allow anyone to attack him. At this point, Otto calls Johan and, as he was taking part in the conversation, decides to punish him with a blow to the head. After class, Eric decides to go swimming in the pool and discovers that it is reserved for the school's athletes. To join the team, the young man has to beat the 50-meter freestyle record and manages to complete the course in just 29 seconds. Seeing the young man's excellent performance, Carl decides to accept him as a member of his team and, that evening, Eric shares the news with his classmate. However, Pierre says he won't congratulate him because he advised him not to do anything to attract attention and his friend did the exact opposite. A few hours later, Eric's presence is requested in the student council room and Dalian orders the young man to polish countless pairs of shoes as punishment for his rebelliousness. However, once again, the young man refuses to follow his orders and returns to his room. The next day, he tells Pierre what happened and says that he's close to fighting with Dalian, but if he does, he'll be expelled immediately. Eric says he doesn't mind being detained for as many weekends as necessary, but he won't accept being made a doormat. The next day, the teasing continues and, after leaving the classroom, Dalian deliberately bumps into the new young man. He then orders Eric to apologize, but the young man refuses because he knows that this is just a strategy by his veterans to train him. So Dalian challenges him to a fight and says he'll be waiting for him in the ring at 7 o'clock. That afternoon, Eric's friends show him where he has to go and tell him that he will have to face 2 of their veterans at once. After being knocked out, the young man will have to crawl on the ground and beg for mercy, as he won't be able to fight back in a 2-on-1 fight. If he refuses the challenge, Eric will have to put up with the taunts of his seniors for the rest of the year, but Pierre advises him against it, as he doesn't want to see his only friend get beaten up. However, the young man is used to hostile environments and doesn't want to be seen as a coward by those guys. So, when he sees Otto and Dalian humiliating another newcomer, the young man decides to go there. But when he talks to his mother on the phone, Eric remembers his promise to her and decides not to fight. During the night, members of the council suddenly appear in the freshmen's rooms to carry out an inspection and throw all the objects on the floor while searching for illicit substances. Seeing this grotesque scene, Eric feels confused, but decides not to say anything so as not to cause confusion. As a member of the swimming team, the young man spends a lot of time in the pool practicing his performance in the water. After observing Eric's performance, the coach realizes that he is an excellent swimmer and invites him to take part in a school championship, which will take place just before Christmas. That night, after dinner, the school's most troublesome freshmen have to go to the student council room to find out what penalty they will have to serve for their infractions. Then, after the meeting, Eric learns that he will be detained at school for 8 weekends, 2 of which he will have to do manual labor. The following Saturday, Dalian gives the rookie his first task and orders him to dig a hole 1 meter deep. The young man takes the whole afternoon to complete the task and, when he finally finishes the job, Dalian orders him to cover that hole before anyone gets hurt falling in. Even in a storm, Eric has to carry out his orders and, after finishing his work, he goes to the cafeteria. All his classmates have already eaten their dinner and he is the only one who hasn't eaten yet. When she goes to serve the food to the young man, Maria, one of the cooks, approaches him and congratulates him on his attitude towards the provocations. She says that Eric reminds her of her brother and claims that, back home, the council members would be lynched for their actions. The following weekend, while all the students go to visit their families, Eric goes to the classroom to study and, during lunch, takes the opportunity to talk to Maria. As they talk, she invites him to go for a walk later and they arrange to meet behind the cafeteria, where Eric and Pierre usually hide to smoke. At the agreed time, the young man is there waiting for the cook and, when Maria appears, they kiss. On Monday, after physical education class, Pierre looks exhausted and says that it's cloister night, when members of the council invade the freshman dormitories to throw buckets of ice water. To avoid being surprised, Eric puts a chest of drawers behind his bedroom door and uses a pile of books to lock the doorknob. As expected, around midnight, the men show up and manage to open the door. But instead of cold water, they throw excrement into Eric's room. Furious, the young man decides to fight back and, with Pierre's help, gathers all the waste in a bucket to throw it back into Otto's room. 2 hours later, while the council members are asleep, Eric breaks into the man's room and pours excrement in his face. He then flees quickly and, luckily, no one can see him. The next night, during dinner, the young man takes the opportunity to tease Otto and asks him what his colleague's waste tastes like. At that moment, the delinquent attacks him and strikes Eric several times in the face. Seeing the bloodied young man, Maria orders Otto to stop and one of the teachers appears to interrupt the assault. As expected, the head of the student council receives no punishment and Eric goes about his life as normal, as if nothing had happened. Since the day they first kissed, the couple have met every night and spent a few minutes chatting before returning to their dormitories. That evening, when they meet, Eric invites Maria to attend the swimming championship that will take place the following day. To everyone's surprise, the young man won almost every race and, if he can beat Leuenhuizen in the 300-meter freestyle, he will take first place in the competition. After a brief conversation with his coach, Eric returns to the pool and becomes the new school champion. After serving 2 months in detention, he can finally return home to visit his mother. When he sees her, the young man hands her the trophy he won and the woman feels very proud of her son. When she checks his report card, she congratulates him on getting an A in all his subjects, but Eric's stepfather orders him to explain the C he received as a grade for his behavior. The young man says that he refused to be treated like a doormat and that's why he was detained on previous weekends. However, the man still decides to punish him and, after dinner, as usual, he lashes Eric on the back. When Christmas comes, the young man sees all his classmates leaving with their parents, but no one shows up to pick him up. So the young man returns to his room and leaves a gift disc on his roommate's bed. When he returns from his holiday, Pierre hands him a huge book and tells him that Eric needs to start studying if he wants to follow his dream of becoming a lawyer. That week, classes start up again and Otto keeps trying to get Eric off his back. However, since he can't pick on him anymore, he decides to take it out on Pierre, his best friend. Even without doing anything, Pierre is punished and learns that he will be detained for 3 weekends in a row. During the night, the council members break into the dormitory and Dalian urinates on the young man's bed for no apparent reason. A few hours later, Eric goes to visit Maria and the young woman tells him that they can't see each other anymore because it's too risky. If they are caught, they will both be expelled from the boarding school. After the inspection, Eric is called to the student council room to serve as a witness because Pierre was caught smoking. However, the truth is that Otto is the one who is smoking and plans to frame Pierre unfairly, but Eric won't allow that to happen. Seeing his friend about to be burned with the cigarette, he offers to suffer punishment in his place and Dalian is terrified to realize that the young man doesn't even move while his skin is being burned. Otto then returns Pierre's clothes and asks him to get dressed. He then orders him to perform in the ring the following night. When the two friends return to their room, Pierre helps his friend clean his wound and, the next morning, Eric tries to convince him not to fight. However, the young man is determined to go into the ring, as he believes that delinquents like Otto and his gang need to be dealt with. However, in an unfair 2-on-1 fight, Pierre doesn't stand a chance and, even after being knocked out, refuses to bow his head to his executioners. Instead of asking for mercy, the young man was beaten until he passed out and was taken to the infirmary. When he wakes up, he finds his friend and Eric says that he will talk to Otto so that this persecution can finally come to an end. That Saturday, while serving his detention, Eric is ordered to nail 4 stakes in the garden and Dalian informs him that they need to be very firm. After doing so, he goes to class and reads until dinner time. When he goes out to eat, the new young man is surprised by members of the student council who grab him and take him to the garden. When they get there, they tie Eric's arms and legs to stakes and Otto orders other students to throw buckets of hot water over him. Johann is then forced to pour cold water over his classmate's body and, after the torture, Eric is left to freeze on the grass. Luckily, Maria shows up a few minutes later and, finding the young man in that deplorable situation, decides to take him to her room. When Eric wakes up, the young woman lies down next to him and they spend the night together. In the morning, when he returns to his room, he finds a letter written by Pierre and learns that his only friend has left the boarding school because he couldn't stand being persecuted any longer. A few days later, Eric receives a visit from his coach and Berg reveals that he's worried about him because he hasn't been out of bed for 4 days. However, Eric says he's fine and tells his coach not to worry. Even when he is questioned about the conduct of Otto and his gang, the young man decides not to say anything. The next day, Eric goes to class and his teacher asks him why he didn't defend his friend. He tells him that he can't attack the members of the council, because if he did he would be expelled. When he hears this excuse, Transtromer says that these young people act like animals, because they only know how to use brute force to defend themselves instead of solving things intelligently. Furious at what he has just heard, Eric decides to fight back and invites Dalian to come to the ring with the council members in an hour. As he doesn't have the courage to face him, Otto orders one of his colleagues to fight in his place and Eric says that he's been thinking a lot about that fight. The young man promises that he will break Dalian's nose and Bully's left arm by the end of the fight. When they hear this, all the other students start laughing, but they are impressed when Otto declares the start of the fight. In the first few seconds, Eric manages to take down his 2 opponents and, as promised, breaks Dalian's nose. However, just as he's about to break Bully's arm, the young man asks for mercy and Eric orders the pair to start crawling, because that's how losers accept defeat. The delinquents are immediately rescued by their classmates and, before leaving the ring, Eric points at Otto as a threat. After winning the fight, the young man goes to find Maria, but Stina reveals that the cook no longer works at the school. According to her, the young woman was fired 3 days ago for getting involved with a student. That afternoon, Eric receives a letter and Otto decides to inspect his room to find it. On discovering that the young man was getting involved with one of the cooks, Otto gives the letter to the principal and Eric has to go to his office to explain himself. When he meets Mr. Lindblad, the man says he has no choice but to expel him. He then asks him to pack his things so that he can leave school the next day. Before leaving, Eric asks for the letter back so that he can get the sender's address and send a reply to Maria, but the principal decides to keep the envelope and advises the student never to look for that woman again. During dinner, when a cook is about to serve Eric, Otto orders her to stop, as only registered students can eat in the cafeteria. After being humiliated in public once again, the young man decides to call his mother to tell her the news, but he doesn't have the courage to tell her the truth and hangs up the phone without saying a word. Before leaving, Eric has some more unfinished business to take care of and goes after Otto. The delinquent was riding through the forest when he came across his greatest enemy carrying a huge branch in his hands. They are 1.5 miles away from the school, so Otto has no way of asking his classmates for help. Eric then orders the young man to kneel down and remove his ring so that his corpse cannot be identified so easily. The young man has already planned Otto's elimination and reveals that he will burn his body after eliminating him, so that no one will ever find him. However, before he even receives the first blow, Otto starts vomiting and Eric reveals that he didn't intend to eliminate him because he's not like him. At this point, the young man returns to his dormitory and packs his bags. Then he waits for the train to leave. Suddenly, he remembers a law described in the book he got for Christmas and goes to talk to the principal. On seeing him, Lindblad asks why the young man hasn't left yet, and Eric says that his right to privacy was violated when his classmates and the principal read a letter addressed to him without his permission. If the man decides to keep the letter sent by Maria, he is committing a crime, so he must return it immediately. Furious, the principal orders Eric to leave the school, but the young man calls his mother's lawyer to help him. Then Ekengren reveals that he has talked to a journalist friend about what happened and he is willing to publish Eric's story in the local paper. If that happens, the school's good reputation will be ruined, so to avoid losing any more students, Lindblad decides to return the letter Maria sent to the young man. In addition, Eric demanded that his expulsion be cancelled and thus managed to stay in school until he graduated. After saying goodbye to his teachers, the young man returns home and gives the report card to his mother, who is extremely happy to see him. During dinner, his stepfather discovers that Eric has received a D in behavior, which means that he has deteriorated since last semester. So, once again, the man prepares to punish him, but this time the young man decides to fight back. He orders his stepfather to leave the house, otherwise he will spend the next few days in hospital with broken arms and unable to see. The young man also says that if he tells the police what happened, the cops will know everything that Coward has been up to in recent years and he'll end up being arrested for domestic violence. After taking revenge on his mother's husband, Eric travels to Switzerland to meet Pierre again and can finally say a proper goodbye to his friend. The young man then goes on his way in search of his first love, in the hope of finding her again. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.